Hello, my friends. As you can see, things look a little differently today. Jason and I have been on the road in Berkeley, California for the last 2.5 weeks. I filmed enough episodes to get me through the time we would be gone and recorded enough podcasts. But a couple of days ago, Jason was informed that he has to stay a little bit longer. He's up here working. Please forgive that. It also means I don't have my teleprompter, so I will be reading from my script a little more visibly than normal. I've told you guys before I use a teleprompter because my memory is not great and I want to make sure I get all the details right. Today we are talking about a man who I believe deserves a lot more coverage. This serial killer committed a lot of the same crimes as the famous serial killers that we hear about a lot. But I believe because of his demise, which we will talk about, he doesn't get as much coverage because there's not as much to talk about. Charlie Brandt was the kind of person that you would walk by on the sidewalk and not give a second thought to. He was a married man with a stable home life. Everything on the outside appeared normal, but just underneath the surface was a deeply disturbed man. There were warning signs and there were red flags, but it appears people chose to ignore them for the most part. Charlie Brandt murdered the people closest to him, and what he did afterwards is almost as shocking as the murders themselves. This story also includes some information about the terrible failures of the justice system. It's pretty bad. The justice system failed in this case, but so did the people around Charlie Brandt. You'll have to decide for yourself where you think the blame lies. I think there's plenty of it to go around. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me. It helps a lot. Today we are talking about the monster, Charlie Brandt. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Brandtt, who went by Charlie, was born on February 23, 1957 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He grew up in what appears to be a normal middle-class family, although we don't have a lot of information about his upbringing. His parents, Herbert and Lisa Brandt, were German immigrants. They moved around a lot, and Charlie was always having to resettle at a new school. I could say the same for my husband. I don't know if that traumatized Charlie, but he did have a difficult time making friends. The family finally settled in Fort Wayne, Indiana in 1968, but they always spent a lot of time vacationing in Florida, and Charlie got very familiar with Florida. By all outward appearances, Charlie had a very normal life. He was shy and he was very withdrawn. He was also close to his mother, which will become very ironic. Even though he looked normal on the outside, something very sinister was brewing in this kid. On January 3rd, 1971, when Charlie was just 13 years old, he committed a crime that should have followed him for the rest of his life, but it didn't. That night in the Brandt house, the family had dinner and then they settled in front of their brand new color TV to watch their favorite TV show, which was called The FBI Files. After the TV show was over, Ilse went upstairs to draw a bath. She was pregnant at the time, 8 months pregnant. And Charlie's father was standing in the family bathroom shaving for absolutely no reason at all. And without warning, Charlie Brandt, 13 years old, goes and gets his father's gun. He walks into the bathroom, walks up behind his father and shoots his father in the back, and then turns the gun on his mother, who is getting ready to get in the bathtub, and he shoots her twice and kills her. So Charlie's father is down on the ground. He is still alive, and Charlie's sister Angela is in her bedroom, laying on her bed reading. She hears the popping noises from the gun, and she goes running into the bathroom. She hears her father yelling, "Charlie, don't. Charlie, don't." And then she hears her mother yell, "Angela, call the police." She's terrified, and she runs back to her bedroom. And then Charlie appears in her bedroom door, raises the gun at her, and pulls the trigger, but it doesn't fire. So Angela runs at her brother, and they struggle over the gun. Angela was scared, but she became even more terrified when she saw the look in Charlie's eyes. She said his eyes were glazed over and he looked like he was in a trance. All of a sudden, Charlie snaps out of it and looks at his sister and he's like, "What am I doing?" Very, very bizarre. Angela runs from the house to get help. She's wearing a bloody and torn nightgown. She runs across the street to her neighbor's house. 16-year-old Sandy Radcliffe opens the front door and Angela runs inside the house. Sandy's standing there bewildered. She knows these kids that live next door to her. And then she sees Charlie come into her yard. He walks up to the front door of her house. Angela's now inside. And Charlie just calmly looks at his neighbor and says, "Sandy, I just shot my mom and dad." The police get there and they find Charlie very calm. He's not crying, he's not upset, but he's not in a trance. He's lucid. They asked him, "What happened?" And he said, "I don't know." And they said, "Why did you do this?" And he said, "I don't know." Charlie's father, Herbert, is taken to the hospital and he survives. His mother, Ilse, is pronounced dead at the scene. And of course, her unborn baby is dead as well. Now, Charlie, being only 13 years old, almost 14 at the time, was too young to go on trial. I guess back then they did not have the juvenile laws that we have now. So he is instead committed to a psychiatric hospital for a year. What happens in the hospital I find very strange. The doctors interview him and have evaluations with him over and over, but they can't really find anything wrong with him. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't know how this works, but I have been evaluated for therapy, and they ask you questions, and the way that you answer the questions leads them to whether or not you have a mental disorder. Well, they asked Charlie all the questions. They interviewed him over and over, and they couldn't find that he had any sort of mental illness. He was never given a definitive diagnosis of any kind. So in 1972, Charlie Brandt is released back into the care of his father. Herbert picks his son up, and the family packs up and moves to Florida, and they never speak of the incident again. Herbert petitioned the courts to seal these records so nobody would be able to find out what his kid had done. Now, look, if a juvenile commits a crime, I do think there should be some protection there because we know sometimes kids do stupid things. This isn't a kid doing a stupid thing. This is a kid who shot and killed his mother, tried to kill his father, and wanted to kill his sister. This is somebody that society needs protecting from. So poor Angela is forced to live with her brother, her mother's killer, her unborn sister or brother's killer, her father's shooter, and someone who obviously wanted to kill her. The family knew there was something wrong with Charlie, but they just didn't know what to do with him. And it seems like Herbert's shame and his concern about people finding out what his son had done was more important to him than protecting other people from Charlie. So Herbert gets remarried, and the family's now living in Omaha Beach, Florida. Herbert and his new wife then decide to move back to Indiana, but they leave Charlie and Angela with their grandparents. This kid isn't in psychiatric care. He's not being evaluated. He's not being monitored. He's a child murderer just on the loose, going to school with everybody else's kids. Charlie ends up going to college, and he gets a degree in electronics. He's really good with electronics. As an adult, he appeared to be a normal functioning human being. He got a stable job working as an aerospace engineer at Ford Aerospace in Astor, Florida. He was respected. He was well liked. This is a person who murdered their own mother. He looked normal to everyone else. As we well know, looks can be very deceiving. In 1986, Charlie Brandt met and married Teri Helfrich. She went by Teri. This woman was very kind and loving. People adored her, and she had no idea about her now husband's dark past. The Brandts seemed like an ideal couple. Charlie was quiet and reserved, while Teri was friendly and outgoing. They had no children, but they were happy and content. They settled into a beautiful house on the beach in Big Pine Key in 1989. So this woman is living with someone who has very serious psychological problems. We know he's violent. We know he's dangerous, but she knows nothing about that. She starts to see some signs. Behind closed doors, Charlie Brandt had this very unusual obsession with medical anatomy books. He collected books that focused specifically on surgical procedures and human anatomy. He also had a very graphic poster of the female anatomy in his room. That's just, yeah. Don't you have one? I swear, sometimes when we hear, he seemed normal. No, he didn't. Charlie also really liked to discuss the details of disturbing crimes, especially murders. We're all just going to pretend that we didn't hear that part. Yeah, those people that like to talk about murder, you really got to watch out for those types. One time when Teri was cleaning, she found a really large collection of disturbing photographs and drawings. They all dealt with murder. Some of them were graphic. Charlie had marked some of them up. And then when the internet became more prolific, Teri found out that Charlie was searching snuff films and watching snuff films online. So again, it's a little frustrating when I hear, everything seemed normal. He seemed like a normal person. No, he did not. Just, medical anatomy posters, violent drawings, and snuff films. Despite these red flags, Teri never thought anything was going on with her husband, apparently. Unfortunately, she was terribly mistaken. Now, I don't know if these medical anatomy posters, graphic books, interest in true crime were a way for Charlie to process the violence he had committed earlier, or were they an obsession about something that he was still very interested in? It seems like the latter to me. Teri lived blissfully unaware of her husband's deviance until Teri didn't live at all. It was hurricane season in Florida. The powerful hurricane known as Hurricane Francis was approaching Florida. Everyone in Big Pine Key was forced to evacuate. Seeking refuge from the storm, Charlie and Teri drove to Charlie's niece's house. Teri's niece was Michelle Jones. She was 37 years old, and she invited her aunt and uncle to come and stay with her. Michelle was a very successful woman. She worked for the Golf Network as an executive. She was very close with her Aunt Teri, and she kind of tolerated Charlie. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. Michelle was loved and respected. She was so kind and invited her family members to come and stay with her. So during the hurricane, Michelle stayed in contact with her mother and her friends. All was well. Everyone was safe from the storms. On September 13th, Michelle called a friend of hers and invited them over to her house to have a drink. Then a couple of hours later, she called again and said, you know what, don't come over. Teri and Charlie are fighting. They're drunk. They've been fighting all day. I don't want you to come over. 2 days later, on September 15th, Michelle failed to show up for work. Michelle never missed work, so this immediately raised the alarm flags. A friend of Michelle's named Mary Lou grew very concerned when she could not reach Michelle by phone. Mary Lou called another friend of Michelle's, a woman named Debbie Knight, and said, Debbie, would you drive over to Michelle's and check on her? I can't get her on the phone. So Debbie Knight arrives at Michelle's house. She knocks on the front door. There is no answer. Debbie decided to go around to the garage door. She tried that doorknob and it was unlocked. And so she went inside. What she found is horrifying. Debbie Knight walks into the living room of her friend Michelle's house, and Charlie Brandt's corpse is hanging from a rafter in the ceiling. His decomposing body was hanging from a noose that he had fashioned out of bed sheets. Debbie ran from the house, she called the police, and they arrived almost immediately. Investigators went into the house. Of course, first they saw Charlie hanging in the middle of the vaulted ceiling. They then found Teri Brandt dead, slumped over on the living room couch. She had been strangled and she had been stabbed to death 7 times, to be precise. In another room, they discovered Michelle's body. Michelle had been brutally murdered and then mutilated. Her head had been severed, her body was opened up, and organs were removed. The body was then placed in a very macabre position. Her heart was outside her body, and she had been very precisely dissected. The body parts were laid out in the manner you would see a body laid out in a medical anatomy book. The weapons that were used were a set of kitchen knives. They were laying near the body as well. Charlie Brandt had killed his wife, killed his niece, done things with the body, mutilated that body, and then taken his own life. In the house, investigators found proof that the trio had had dinner. Charlie was the cook in the group. He had cooked some fish. They'd had a nice dinner. They'd had some wine. So think about that. You're invited to the home of a relative during a time of need. You all have a nice dinner together, and then you kill your wife. You do terrible things to your niece, murder her, mutilate her, and then kill yourself. With Charlie Brandt dead, the investigators obviously had to go digging into his past. Nobody to talk to. They couldn't interview this guy. After speaking with Charlie's surviving family members, the police learned what he had done. They learned about Charlie's childhood crime, his juvenile records that had been sealed, the murder of his pregnant mother, the shooting of his father. People in law enforcement were shocked to find out that these juvenile records had been sealed intentionally to hide what this guy had done. Now, again, we see juvenile records that get sealed all the time, not for murder. Sometimes, but not very often. As the police begin to talk more about this killer and the way he dismembered Michelle, they realize that they've got some victims from past murders, unsolved cases that were dissected in the same manner. They begin to look into Charlie Brandt as though he might be a serial killer. Authorities go and search the home at Big Pine Key. There they discover Charlie's collection of anatomy books, serial killer books, horror movies. Again, we're just going to pretend we didn't hear any of that. I hope nobody ever goes through my stuff. And then they discovered Charlie's internet history. Charlie Brandt spent hours and hours every day online searching and viewing images of necrophilia and horrific violence against women. This man was a monster just hiding in plain sight. Then investigators found Charlie's special collection of Victoria's Secret catalogs. He had marked up the catalogs and written things near the models, drawn things on the models. I have to be a little bit careful what I say here, but it was very disturbing. And then, after talking to family members, the police found out that Charlie always called his niece, Michelle Jones, Victoria's Secret. I keep seeing those TikToks where people say, if you have a creepy uncle or brother-in-law or something, that whenever he comes over, the kids have to make sure they have clothes on or, don't be alone. That person shouldn't be allowed in your house. We don't let people like that in our houses. I don't care if you're family. But anyway, this guy called his own niece Victoria's Secret. And so upon hearing this, the cops begin to look into Charlie's fascination with Michelle, and they find out it's more of an obsession. He harbored a very strong infatuation for this woman. He would visit her home often, sometimes showing up unannounced. And he was also very possessive of Michelle. He didn't like her dating. He always had something negative to say about the guys in her life. I did read some articles that say Michelle may have been gay. I don't know. But whoever Michelle had in her life, Charlie acted weird around them. The police and the psychologists involved began to realize that this murder was a fantasy come to life. Charlie had been thinking about this for a really long time. He had been obsessed with Michelle for a long time. And the more the police look into him, they realize how violent he is, how violent his patterns are, and they become convinced that he has killed more people. And then Angela came forward. When Charlie Brandt's sister Angela heard about the shooting, she went to Florida. One of Michelle's friends said that Angela showed up one day. She was supposed to go and talk to the police, but she didn't show up for her interview. And then later that day, they were standing outside the house where this all took place, and they could see somebody sitting in a car across the street. Well, it was Angela. Angela sees the women looking at her. She gets out of the car and she walks towards them. She introduces herself as Charlie's sister, and she tells these women, friends of Michelle's, "There is something I need to tell you." Michelle's friends stood in stunned silence as Angela told them about that terrible night in 1971, the night when Charlie killed his pregnant mother, shot his father. They could not believe what they were hearing. And then Angela tells these women that the strangest thing, the thing that she's had the hardest time getting over in all the years since that, is how much Charlie loved his mother and how close he was with her. Angela said that is the thing that she has always been the most confused about. It wasn't like Charlie had a bad relationship with his mother or his father. He was actually really close to his mom, and he murdered her. Angela actually called Charlie a mama's boy when she was telling her story. Angela told Michelle's friends that after the murders, her dad, Herbert's eyes were dilated for weeks, and he was in shock. She said her dad was not the same person. He was never the same person. And Angela would often find him sitting alone, and he would just look up at her and say, "Why did this happen?" She said that her dad would say over and over, "Why did my son do this? Why did my son do this?" It's like something snapped in him and he was just never okay again. So in the months following these murders, the investigators involved in the case start looking deeper into Charlie's background. They found eerie similarities between Michelle Jones' murder and several other homicides. There were victims of homicides in the area that were mutilated in much the same manner that Michelle had been. Some of these cases lacked definitive evidence, and so it was hard to bring charges. But Charlie Brandt is suspected of killing 6 additional victims. Many of these women were found partially or fully dismembered, and they had very precise cuts on their bodies, almost surgical, which are hallmarks of what Charlie did. One of the most notable cases linked to Charlie Brandt was the 1989 murder of a woman named Sherry Parisio. 38-year-old Sherry was murdered, and her body was mutilated in a manner very similar to Michelle Jones' killing, and Sherry Parisio was murdered in Big Pine Key, just a short distance from the Brandt house. She'd been stabbed to death, and her heart was removed in the same manner as Michelle's. When Sherry's body was found, people came forward and said they had seen a man in the area, a man that they did not recognize. So the police had those witnesses sit down with a sketch artist, and this is the sketch they came up with. As you can see, it most definitely resembles Charlie Brandt. More friends of Teri Brandt's begin to come forward, and one of them has something very shocking to say to the police. This woman tells the police that Teri told her before she was murdered that one night Charlie came home with blood all over his shirt, and he was acting strangely. Charlie told Teri that he'd been cleaning fish at night. Let me tell you something. If Mr. Jason ever comes home at night with blood on his shirt, he is getting questioned. He is getting interrogated. Now, there are even people that believe Teri was involved in some of Charlie's killings. I don't know if I believe that, but at the very least, it seems like she knew something was up. Charlie Brandt is also suspected of killing 12-year-old Carol Sullivan, who disappeared from a bus stop in 1978. Carol had post-mortem mutilations similar to that of both Michelle and Sherry. In 1995, Darlene Tuller's body was found in a field in Miami. Darlene was a sex worker whose headless and heartless body was found wrapped in plastic after she was exsanguinated, meaning all blood had been drained from her body. Her heart was taken by her killer. Darlene was last seen getting into a 1980s model Chevrolet Blazer with dark tinted windows. She disappeared on Thanksgiving Day, 1995, and the car was a rental. Although there is no definitive proof, law enforcement officials believe it is highly likely that Charlie Brandt had been killing for years, possibly even decades. Authorities who have looked into this case and experts believe it is highly likely that Charlie Brandt is a serial killer. I think one of the most interesting aspects of this story is how easily Charlie evaded detection. His early crime was erased because he was a juvenile. His quiet and unassuming nature allowed him to blend into society. And as you can imagine, the family members of Teri and Michelle were very angry when they found out that this man had killed his own mother and that everything had been buried for the sake of pride. The family members report being especially angry at Herbert, Charlie's father. He really protected Charlie. And while I understand that, as a parent, you always want to protect your child, you can't do that by sacrificing other people. It seems like Herbert was more interested in protecting his own shame and his own reputation than he was in keeping people safe from his son. But there's something else I find really weird about this. Remember Mary Lou? Mary Lou is the friend that sent Debbie Knight over, who initially found the bodies. Mary Lou said she has never seen a man love anyone more than Charlie loved Teri. She actually said, if my husband could love me 1/3 as much as Charlie loved Teri, I'd be the luckiest woman in the world. She said Charlie worshiped the ground that Teri walked on. That, of course, explains why he took his own life. Couldn't live with the fact that he killed Teri. It does not explain why he killed Teri in the first place. I mean, did he want his niece that bad? Was he that obsessed with his niece that he killed his wife to get to his niece? Because Charlie took his own life, we will never have answers to a lot of these questions. Investigators never had the chance to interrogate him. I don't have any interview footage to show you. We know very little about this man, and that's a shame to me. I've said it 1,000 times, but somebody always says, well, if you would just let these things die, these people wouldn't get attention. You couldn't be more wrong. We don't burn books. We don't pretend like bad things in history didn't happen. We don't try to erase bad things from history. And we talk about criminals and serial killers because we need to learn what makes them. We need to study them. It also does a serious disservice to the victims when we forget about what happened to them. So yes, it is always a shame when a serial killer takes his life or will not speak to the media or investigators because it robs us of the chance to learn about them. Charlie Brandt's case is especially disturbing because he is a kid who proved he was dangerous. He committed a horrific crime at 13 years old, and then he was given this second chance to live a normal life. He had a real ability to conceal his violent tendencies, and it's such a good reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones we least suspect. So while Charlie Brandt is dead, the mystery surrounding him will continue. Could he have been stopped earlier? If he got proper treatment after he committed that crime at such a young age, would he not gone on to have done these things? I don't know. It all goes back to that same question. Are killers born or are they made? He will forever remain a mystery to experts. What made Charlie Brandt into the monster he became? Or was he born bad? Thank you for joining me today on this little bit of a different episode of Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Mulder is out cold. You know, he's Agent Mulder. He's used to all these scary stories. Give my podcast a listen if you haven't. It's on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.